Hey everybody, we're going to jump into your digestive system APR video. I've got the terms and concepts pulled up over here on the left, and I'm just going to hop right into our module, our digestive system module. So with the digestive system, there are, there's a lot of small parts, individual parts relative into each kind of organ or system that you're probably more familiar with. So you're probably familiar with some of the major parts of the GI tract: the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus. But there's probably specific features on those that we want to make sure that we are looking at and paying attention to. So I'm going to start in the oral cavity with our mouth. So as always, when you're looking at these dissection images, it can be kind of confusing at first to just orient yourself. So take a look at some of these kind of more external superficial features, things like the nose. You can see that projection of the nose, the lips, and the teeth. And so being able to identify just kind of those features. If this is the nose, this means this is the nasal cavity. If these are the lips and the teeth, this is the oral cavity that's being highlighted in blue. The large thing in the oral cavity is the tongue. So you can see the tongue takes up a large amount of space. It's a big muscle that sits there in that oral cavity. Let's see. We can also look at the hard palate. The hard palate is that bone that separates the oral cavity and the nasal cavity. If you take your tongue and you press it up into the roof of your mouth, you're touching the hard palate is what you're pressing up against. The hard palate continues back until it turns into the soft palate, which is more connective tissue. The soft palate includes this structure called the uvula, which I cannot highlight here. We'll be able to probably in the respiratory one. So let me jump into respiratory real quick. For respiratory and our uvula. So the uvula is this little, the most distal portion of your soft palate. So you have hard palate, soft palate. You can see that transition from bone, this more yellowish porous bone structure, to this more kind of pale, continuous connective tissue until it ends and terminates in the uvula, which is going to lift to block off the nasal cavity from the oral cavity when you go to swallow. Jumping back into our oral cavity. So oral cavity to the hard palate, soft palate, the uvula, the tongue. The lingual frenulum is not one that we can really see very visible. The lingual frenulum is the structure that holds the tongue, it anchors the tongue into the mouth. If someone, you might hear someone being tongue-tied, where that frenulum is actually long or shorter than it needs to be, and so their tongue can't quite move properly. And so that's your oral cavity. We also can look at the teeth. So with the teeth, you should be able to identify your maxillary teeth from your mandibular teeth. More than likely, I would give you, let me see. No, where's the image that I want? Yeah, this image where you're looking from the side, the lateral view of the oral cavity. You can see the mandibular teeth and the maxillary teeth. That's one of those ways that I would ask you that. I can also ask you to identify the kind of teeth. So we could look at incisors. So you should be able to identify those as incisors, canines, those pointy teeth. So 4 incisors on the top and bottom, 2 canines on the top and bottom. You have your premolar, your first premolar, your second premolar. And then if you don't have your wisdom teeth removed, you then have 3 molars. First, second, and third, which is the wisdom teeth. Most people have their wisdom teeth removed. They just don't quite have enough space in their mouth for all those teeth. And so we tend to have our wisdom teeth removed. I had braces when I was younger, and so they also removed these second molars from me as well. So I only have 24 adult teeth total. 4 incisors, 2 canines, 2 premolars, and 2 molars is standard, is what kind of is most common, top and bottom. So you should be able to identify the kind of tooth that you're seeing. The actual structure of a tooth, for that one, I'm going to hop into our textbook real quick. Let me pull that up. We can see, it should be right here. This is figure 26.6. the anatomy of a molar, and so you can see the general structure of your molars. So starting with something like the crown. The crown is the part of the tooth that projects above the gingiva, the gum line. So the crown is that portion that sits above. That's what you brush, right? You're brushing the crown of the tooth. The crown is also covered in this enamel. This is a bone-like structure that covers the outside of the tooth. And the enamel is protecting the dentin. So you can see this structure right in here, just deep to the enamel, excuse me, is the dentin of the tooth. And then within that, you start to get into your pulp cavity that has all of the nerves and the blood vessels. So the dentin, the enamel are all protecting this pulp cavity, which again contains your large mass of blood vessels and nerves. When there's damage to the enamel, to the dentin, that can start to expose these nerves to air, to bacteria, things like that, and they start to get really painful and can send sharp signals. The pulp cavity is connected to the root canal. So if you hear of someone having a root canal, usually that means that they're having to drill down through the crown, through the dentin, to clear out that whatever damage is happening into that root. So crown sits above the gum line. The neck is connecting the crown to the root of the tooth. So you have all of these periodontal ligaments that run along here that are connecting your jawline, either your maxilla or mandibular bone, to the tooth itself. So it's a bone on bone. We call it a gomphosis is the type of joint, if you remember that from 168 skeletal system stuff. And so you have all of these little periodontal ligaments that run along the tooth. And so these have to be pulled when someone is pulling a tooth. Those all have to be what's a good word besides ripped out? And that's really the only one that's coming to my mind. And so that's why it tends to take so much pressure and effort to extract teeth. Let's see, anything else in there? Dentin, pulp. Yeah, that's really good. So crown, neck, and root are the three main parts of your tooth. And the crown is covered with enamel. Deep to the enamel is your dentin. Deep to the dentin is the pulp cavity with blood vessels and nerves. And again, that was figure, what is this, section 26.1, 26.2b, and then figure 26.6a is the image that I would use. All right, salivary glands. So we've seen these once before, so it's a good thing that we can just kind of review these really quick. There are 3 salivary glands. Your parotid is the largest of your salivary glands. It sits just on the side of the jawline, right on top of that masseter muscle. You have your submandibular gland. So this is the mandible bone right here. There's the tooth, right? They've kind of dissected it, so you can see part of that bone right there. So below the mandible is the submandibular gland. They've dissected off the sublingual gland. You can't see that here. What we are seeing is the submandibular duct. Okay. Then we have the sublingual gland, and there's the sublingual gland. So submandibular, and then sublingual, we can add that back onto there. And it is just below the tongue. So that's how you can, a lot of times people will get the submandibular and sublingual confused. Sublingual is just below the tongue. That's what sublingual means. Yeah. All right. Within the oral cavity, we can also talk about the pharynx, which of course is the entire tube that connects nasal cavity, oral cavity into the throat. We can speak specifically about the laryngopharynx and the oropharynx. These are the parts that are just supposed to be for food. So the oropharynx, posterior in the oral cavity, the laryngopharynx, obviously behind the larynx. You have your epiglottis that's going to cover things up. And then the laryngopharynx is continuous with the esophagus. So there is no distinction structurally, really, between the laryngopharynx and the esophagus. They are one continuous open tube. We can look at the esophagus just on its own, right there. So you can see esophagus is a long tube. It is connecting down into the stomach, right there, just below the diaphragm. That's what this muscle is right here. This is the diaphragm. Just anterior to the esophagus is the trachea. So that's what this connective tissue, that cartilaginous structure is, your trachea right there. You have the abdominal or thoracic aorta, you have the thoracic aorta right there. This is your inferior vena cava. Okay, so just kind of orienting ourselves with our vessels. Trachea, esophagus, aorta, inferior vena cava. All right. Your esophagus does have a couple of sphincters to it. We can't visualize the superior esophageal sphincter, but we'll be able to see the second sphincter once we start looking at the stomach. So let's go into the stomach. So esophagus continues with the stomach. You can see there's just kind of the most distal portion of the esophagus. Like I said, there is a sphincter that controls movement from the esophagus into the stomach itself. That sphincter has multiple names. This one, the lower esophageal sphincter, is what APR uses, and that's what we have in the lab manual, so I will use that. You can see how the esophagus kind of constricts right here, the stomach rather constricts, and so there's an involuntary muscle that sits right there, smooth muscle, and that is your lower esophageal sphincter. It's also called the inferior esophageal sphincter, cardiac sphincter, and gastroesophageal sphincter. So I believe on the quiz and practical, it will be lower esophageal sphincter is what is the correct answer. But if you put any of these other answers, as long as it's correct, I'll go back and give credit for that. So this sphincter, that sphincter of the esophagus, connects into the stomach. So just to highlight this, what actually is the stomach there. You have the stomach. Posterior to the stomach is the pancreas. And then the stomach itself is continuous with the duodenum. That's the first part of the small intestine. So the stomach itself is made up of multiple parts. This first part where food enters is called the cardia. That's why this is also called the cardiac sphincter. And it's where heartburn, we get the term heartburn from. Because this is pretty much right underneath the heart, just kind of inferior to the heart. When gastric juices move back up into the esophagus, it gives that burning sensation that feels like heartburn. This is the cardia of your stomach. From the cardia, food will move into what's called the fundus, this large rounded portion. We're going to see a fundus is just a description of this rounded area. Your uterus has a fundus as well. So that's just kind of a description of a shape. So from the cardia to the fundus, then food is going to move into the body of the stomach, where it spends most of its time before it moves into the pyloric part of the stomach. And from the pyloric part, this is where it sits and waits until it moves into the small intestine, into the duodenum, based on a multitude of signals. Food will sit in your stomach for about 2 to 6 hours, just depending on what kind of food it is, what signals it's getting for digestion, and feedback from the stomach itself, from your brain, from your intestines, all those things. When you get into lecture, you'll learn about regulation of that timing. But the pyloric part of the stomach, it has a pyloric sphincter, so you can see this kind of enlargement of smooth muscle right there in purple. That is indicating the pyloric sphincter. So as food comes in, it will wait here before it can be released out, because the stomach only likes to release small amounts at a time. It doesn't want to overwhelm the duodenum, so you just have small amounts of it at one time coming through. While we have the inside of the stomach visible to us, we can also highlight the gastric folds. These are also called rugae. I believe, okay, yeah, the manual does have both of those, both pyloric and, or gastric folds and rugae. And so these allow for distension of the stomach itself. We can see the muscular layer of the stomach, right? But we can't really visualize the 3 individual layers of the stomach muscle, so we can just talk about the muscular layer. They are all kind of layered on top of each other, and so it's really hard to distinguish longitudinal, circular, and oblique in this muscle. Let's see. Lesser curvature and greater curvature, that is just referring to this kind of smaller curve of the stomach and then this larger outer curve of the stomach. It's a nice way to be able to remember how the stomach itself orients in the abdomen. This greater curvature should be pointing over towards the left. Okay, so you have the greater curvature pointing over towards the left. The body and the cardia are superior, and so that can help you just to orient yourself in your stomach. All right, let's move then into the small intestine. So going into our abdomen, our abdominal cavity. It's important just to kind of real quick, I want to look over here at our key figures and things. So the terms and concepts, we have our mouth, and it includes all of these structures, right? You have the esophagus and the stomach, small intestine, the large intestine. And then you have the large intestine itself is broken up into the colon, as well as the rectum and the anus. So a lot of times people will use the terms colon and large intestine interchangeably, and it's really not true. Like even kind of here, we kind of have that. And so it makes sense if you say colon, people know what you're talking about. But the large intestine includes the colon as well as the rectum and the anus. So just a fine distinction there. That's still good to know. So let's start with the small intestine. So the small intestine, we saw the duodenum in that stomach image. You can also see it right here. Without the stomach, it sometimes is tricky for students to be able to identify the duodenum itself, but it's right there with the pancreas. And so you can see this is where the stomach would be sitting right here on top of the pancreas, connecting into the duodenum. From the duodenum, we move into the jejunum. Let's see if it will allow me to highlight the jejunum. I don't think this one does, but if we go into our practice atlas, let me see. There we go. We have the duodenum, the jejunum, and then the ileum. And so this is something that I could use, this is an image that I could use to ask you about those three different parts of the small intestine. I'm under the practice atlas, life-size digestive system, small and large intestines. And I need to remember to kind of highlight this more. You can go and search jejunum, and you can see all the different ways where it's being presented. Make sure you just read it, right? If it says here you're being able to see the actual practice atlas image what we were just working in. 3D models, these are actually going to be models that you can rotate around, and then histology. So those would be micrographs, microscopic images of the histology of those structures. And so typically what, unless it says histology on here, or you see me highlighting it in these videos, I'm not going to ask you about the histology of the lacteals of the jejunum. That's not something that's going to be listed on here, and it's not something that I'm highlighting. But the search feature is a nice way to be able to find that image, right? You can see a little bit there. That's kind of a hard image to identify, but oh, this one, that's a pretty easy way for me to identify the jejunum. Okay. We also have the ileum in that image, and you can see just the distal part of the ileum here where it connects into the large intestine. And so that would be a nice one for us to use there. Let's see. Within the duodenum, what I want to find is the hepatopancreatic sphincter. I want to find you a good image of that, so let me use my own device. Search. That's the ampulla. What can be tricky is that some of these have multiple names and I have to remember what that other name is. So instead of doing that, I can find it. It's going to let me see the ampulla. So the only difference is that the ampulla is the actual place, and the sphincter is the muscle. I had an image of this though, so that's why I kind of am hoping to be able to find it. No, I don't know why I clicked on liver. I might just have to come back to this. That might be that's probably the best way for us to indicate it. So major duodenal papilla and the hepatopancreatic sphincter, these are the same thing. I know that's confusing. Those are very different names, but they are essentially the same thing. And so hepatopancreatic refers to where the liver and the pancreas are going to be releasing their juices. And so you can see this pancreatic duct here, the bile duct here, all coming into the duodenum, right in that area. And so this is the image that I most likely would use, and that's where it would be indicated, at least, is where these two vessels are coming together, and then you have this opening into your duodenum. That is your hepatopancreatic sphincter. I'll also accept major duodenal papilla. I would take any of those. If that brings up any questions, just reach out to me. I can clarify that for you independently, because I know that's tricky to concept to understand. Okay, so that is your duodenum. Food comes into the duodenum. It receives secretions from the liver, bile from the liver, pancreatic juices with digestive enzymes. It moves through the small intestine, the jejunum, the ileum. And then from the ileum, where it meets the large intestine, we call this the ileocecal junction. The ileocecal junction. So the cecum is the first part of the large intestine. That's this pouch right here. A big feature of the cecum is the appendix. Excuse me. Vermiform appendix is what we call it, this little tail. Food should move from the cecum up into the ascending colon, but sometimes it moves backward into the appendix and gets stuck in there and can cause appendicitis, which is an emergency life-threatening condition. But if everything goes right, as it should, from the cecum, we go up the ascending, across the transverse colon, and then down the descending colon. From the descending colon, it moves into the sigmoid colon, which kind of has this slight U shape to it. This is where feces tends to rest. So by the time we get in here, once we get into our colon, we've moved enough water where it's starting to become compacted into feces. And then feces will sit in the sigmoid colon until there's signals from up in the upper digestive tract that this feces needs to move along. As food moves through the intestines, it'll push the material, the feces in the sigmoid colon, into the rectum, which we cannot see quite in this image, but you can see how the sigmoid colon is starting to connect, and this is going posterior to our bladder. That's your bladder right there. This is going to go kind of posterior and down, and that's your rectum right there. So feces moves from the sigmoid into that. The sigmoid is the most common site for colon cancer because this is where feces tends to sit the longest, which is why it's good to have fiber and regular bowel movements to help keep things moving, keep things going. There are also a couple of these flexures, which are just the bends in the colon itself. So you have your right colic flexure and your left colic flexure, also called the hepatic or the splenic, respectively. So let me see. The left colic flexure is over there on the left. So your spleen sits right behind that. So that's why they call it the left colic flexure. It's also on the left side. And then the right colic flexure, the hepatic flexure, because it's just inferior to the liver right there. That's where those get their names. For the rest of this, we can go into the peritoneum to see part of this. So we had the sigmoid colon right there. The sigmoid colon, as we said, connects into the rectum. So the sigmoid colon, this is your bladder. It goes around and then connects into the rectum. From the rectum, we have the anal canal, which leads out through the anus itself. There is another view for this one. I want to go into the practice atlas. Let's just use the female pelvis. Make sure you look at both of these because the median view is the better view for this one. So again, just seeing what we were just looking at. We had the sigmoid colon, which connects into our rectum, the anal canal, and the anus itself. There are also the internal and external anal sphincters. The external anal sphincter is further out. The internal anal sphincter, you can see, is a little bit closer to the actual anal canal. What's helpful to remember is that the internal anal sphincter is involuntary. It's smooth muscle. The external anal sphincter is voluntary. This is skeletal muscle that we voluntarily control. On the quiz and the practical, you'll see that hint. It'll highlight one of these and it'll say identify the structure. Hint, this is voluntary muscle. And then for internal anal sphincter, it will say hint, this is involuntary muscle. So that's a nice way just to be able to distinguish which one it is that you're trying to label. It's also good while we're here, we'll do it here, and we'll also look at it in the reproductive systems, but just making sure that you kind of are keeping track of the internal organs. The rectum is the most posterior of these passageways. Just anterior to the rectum is the vaginal canal. And then just in front of that is the urethra. There's the bladder. It lets me highlight the bladder. It doesn't let me highlight the urethra. That's fun. But then you have the bladder, or the urethra leading out, the vagina, and then the rectum. Okay? Anterior to posterior. If you're looking at these side images and trying to figure out which way is anterior, which way is posterior, you're just totally lost, look for the sacrum. You can see that bone right there, that kind of porous, lighter color tissue is the bone. This is the sacral bone, right? There's your spinal cord with your tailbone right in there. Yeah, right in there is the tailbone. Okay, I believe, let's go back. That gives us most of the actual structures of the colon. And so let's go back into here, looking at the abdominal cavity. A couple of things that we want to highlight are the tinea coli. So this is a tendon that runs along the large intestine. It sits right on top of the large intestine, and it's going to cause the large intestine to bunch up into these little pouches called haustra that we'll look at in just a moment. A couple of different names, a couple of ways to spell this. You can do this spelling, tinea coli, or you can kind of do this one that we have here in the lab manual. I'll accept either one. This is the one that is on the quiz, but I will accept this version as well. And then let's look at the mesentery. So the mesentery is this connective tissue that helps to hold the small intestine in place. If they need you to do abdominal surgery, they can just take your intestines out and they can just kind of put them right back in. And because that has connective tissue, because it's a one-way tube, as long as there's no big kinks or twists, it will organize itself back. As food and material move through it, it will organize itself back into the way that it's supposed to be. But it has this mesentery to help with that. There is also what we call the omentum. So the greater omentum, it's also called the lacy apron. It sits over top of the intestines and acts as a connective tissue support. If there is abdominal damage or you have abdominal surgery, sometimes the omentum will bunch up in certain places to help stabilize that. I did a dissection where the patient had a gallbladder, her gallbladder removed. It was old gallbladder surgery. Now they do it laparoscopically through the belly button, and it's not quite as intense. They used to do an incision all the way across your abdomen. It would be this giant kind of 18-inch incision across your abdomen where they would go and remove the gallbladder. And in this patient, her omentum had actually moved and bunched up to sit right underneath that scar to provide additional stability to the abdominal contents. And so the greater omentum, you also have a little bit here called the lesser omentum, kind of helping to anchor the stomach where it's supposed to be. But now you can kind of see this is the greater omentum, this kind of yellowish apron that sits on top of all your intestines and covers them. So typically when you're dissecting through the abdomen, you'll dissect through the greater omentum and you can just kind of cut it off and then remove it and flap it back, reflect it back and see the intestines. Oh, haustra. Let's look at those. So we're going back into Practice Atlas. We're going into, let's search. Let's see what comes up. It's always nice when there's only a few of them. Okay, this is the image that it would be. So Practice Atlas, remember that's what you kind of, a lot of times what I'll end up using. So you can see they've highlighted one of the haustra here. So each of these little pouches is a haustra, and that's caused by this tinea coli. This tendon causes the intestines to bunch up into these small sections, individual sections. And so as matter, as chyme is moved through and it gets compacted into feces, it's kind of broken up into these smaller little sections to be able to isolate and get as much water out. And then you can see in the sigmoid colon, you start to lose those haustra, the tinea coli ends. So that's why feces doesn't always come out as small individual clumps, although sometimes it does. Okay, I believe that's most of your large intestine structures. So we can go into some of our accessory organs. The liver, gallbladder, and pancreas are the accessory organs of the digestive system. They release their secretions into the intestines to help with digestions. Other accessory organs are going to be things like your salivary glands, your teeth, your tongue. Those are all things that assist in digestion. They're not technically part of the tube itself. The GI tract, right, your mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. That's the GI tract. Liver, gallbladder, pancreas are accessory structures. So let's jump back to our dissection. We have the liver right here. So I'm always getting ahead of myself. We can look at just the liver in the abdomen. You can see it's this large internal organ. It's about, if you spread both of your hands out wide, that's about how big your liver is. It takes up a large part of your abdominal cavity. It has multiple lobes to it, 4 lobes that we're going to look at. And just inferior to the liver is the gallbladder. That's right there. The liver does many functions, one of which, of course, is to make bile. The gallbladder is just there to store and release bile when it gets that signal. So let's look at the liver specifically. We can identify the different lobes of the liver. So the large one is always the right lobe. Okay, there's your right lobe. And this is telling you how you're looking at it. So anterior, this is how you would look at it in your patient. If you were standing in front of your patient, they were looking at you, this is the view that you would be seeing. Postero inferior, this is where you're kind of looking back and down. So this is kind of, you can imagine if the liver were, if it were your liver, like you're thinking about your liver in your body, this is kind of the view that you would be looking at, except of course it's below and not above. That way we can see these other vessels and structures. So the right lobe is the large one. The left lobe is the small one that points off to the side. And then you have two lobes inferior down here. There is the caudate lobe and the quadrate lobe. Quadrate. The way that I remember them is that quadrate means four, and you have four sides. 1, 2, 3, 4. Distinct four sides. And so that's how I remember the quadrate lobe. The caudate lobe, really how I remember that is that this vessel right here is the vena cava, and so the caudate and the cava, C and C, they're both right beside each other. Another really kind of silly thing that I think of is, okay, well there's the gallbladder. Gallbladder starts with a G, quadrate starts with a Q, but those letters kind of look similar to each other, and so those two are beside each other. That's just how my brain works, right? If it works for you, that's great, use it. If it does not, then don't worry about it. You also have a couple of ligaments. You have things like your round ligament and your falciform ligament. A lot of these are fetal structures. The falciform ligament is a remnant of that ductus venosus that bypasses the liver in fetal circulation. Right. What's cool about the liver is that if you you can remove part of it, like if you have a liver transplant, they'll take out part of your liver and put that in someone else. That little part will grow into a full liver, and your liver will repair itself. Liver is an incredibly important, very a vital structure, and so make sure it's always around. So those are the lobes. Those are the four main lobes and the two ligaments with the liver. For these other parts where it starts talking about the hepatic ducts, common bile duct, common hepatic duct, those things, that's the biliary duct. That's what that's referring to. So your biliary system is going to be your bile system, basically. So again, we have the liver and the gallbladder, and we also have the duodenum. Right? And what's important to remember is that the liver, so here again, here is your liver, there's your gallbladder, there's your pancreas. The pancreas and the liver are both going to be emptying their secretions into the duodenum through that sphincter that we looked at earlier and gave a couple different names to. So let's talk about how bile gets to there. Start with bile first. So where it's going to start is that you're going to have your let's see if it will let me. There we go. I was looking for right and left, and it didn't have that. So it just lists as the hepatic ducts. So the hepatic ducts are going to be collecting bile from the different lobes of the liver, kind of like how the lungs have different sections, the liver has different lobes to it. Your kidneys have, their different pyramids, all those kind of things. It's lobular organs. And so the ducts from the liver that are making bile, they eventually collect into your left and your right hepatic ducts. Where these two ducts come together, they form the common hepatic duct. And the common hepatic duct is going to join with this one right here. You see that little bit right there? That's called the cystic duct. When the cystic duct and the common hepatic duct come together, they form the bile duct. Okay, so we'll do that one more time. Hepatic ducts, right and left hepatic ducts, join to make the common hepatic duct. The common hepatic duct and the cystic duct from the gallbladder join to make the bile duct. So what will happen is that if there is food that's being digested actively in the duodenum, if the liver is making bile, it can just release that bile directly down the hepatic duct, the bile duct, into the duodenum. But if the liver is producing bile, because it continuously produces bile, and that's not needed if there's nothing that's being digested, as bile moves down the common hepatic duct, it will actually travel up the cystic duct and get stored in the gallbladder. And it's going to hang out in the gallbladder and chill there until it's time for digestion, in which case the gallbladder starts to contract, and bile can then go back out through the cystic duct and down the bile duct to be released into the duodenum. So the cystic duct is a two-way passage. It's a two-way street. The rest of them are all one way. The hepatic ducts, the common hepatic duct, and the bile duct are one direction. All right. For the gallbladder, we're not really going to look at the cystic artery and the cystic vein. It's just the gallbladder and the cystic duct. Cystic, by the way, is always going to refer to your gallbladder. If someone has cholecystitis or a cholecystectomy, that means that they have their gallbladder either inflamed and then removed. It's common enough to happen. All right, last is the pancreas. So the pancreas, something big that we can see is the pancreatic duct, that large tube that's running through there. This is collecting all of the pancreatic juices that are being secreted by those pancreatic cells. It collects and is stored in the pancreatic duct until it's time for release. Certain chemical signals, either fats or acids, whatever it may be, will trigger the release of the pancreatic juices through that pancreatic duct. Let's see, the pancreas itself, I can go back into the abdomen. The pancreas has a couple different portions, the body, the tail of the pancreas, and then the head. There is two ducts. Here's most likely, I'm pretty sure if I ask you about the duct system, the biliary ducts, I use that image that we were just on, but just to kind of let you see it here as well, you have hepatic ducts, common hepatic duct, cystic duct, bile duct. I don't believe we have a good view of the accessory pancreatic duct. Let's see, there might be one. Practice atlas. Yeah, you can see a little bit here. So essentially what happens is the pancreatic duct itself, the major pancreatic duct, does split a little bit higher and called the accessory duct that is not connected to the bile duct. And so some pancreatic juices are released through the accessory duct, but it's not really under any other special stimulation. And as it notes here, that's why I like looking at these notes because it will tell you that not all people even have an accessory pancreatic duct. Most pancreatic juices, their signals are going to be released through the major pancreatic duct, or just pancreatic duct as we call it. Okay, I think that's pretty much all of those features. I don't believe there's much histology that we were looking at for this one. So pretty much everything is either going to be in the dissection or the practice atlas. If you have any questions, let me know.